Hopefully this made sense. And now finally, let's start dealing with that scroll functionality. And again, the reason why the previous one wasn't working as great is because when it comes to the scroll event, we're adding that event on a window. And we're doing that on initial load. And on initial load, actually loading will always be false. Why? Here, because it's set in a state equal to false. And the way we fix that, well, first we want to set up that use effect. So yes, there's going to be a third use effect that we're going to use for that scroll one. So we'll say here use effect, and then we'll pass in our callback function. Then we'll say that this is going to happen on initial render, and then we'll go with window, add event listener, and we'll be listening for scroll event, and we'll pass in the event. So you can set it up here outside, but again, this is not going to make biggest difference where the callback function is, because even if you place the callback function outside the use effect, since we invoke this functionality on initial load, you'll still have no access to the loading. So even though previously I set up everything in a function, that's not the reason why there were some bugs. So let me pass here the event, and above it, I just want to set it up. I'll say event, and event is going to be equal to my function. And what do I want to do in the function? Well, I do want to check the inner height. I do want to check scroll Y, and then I want to check the document body. And if inner height plus the scroll Y is bigger than the scroll height minus 2, then we'll do something. Then we'll trigger some state value, but it's not going to be page. And that is very, very important, where I'm going to go with window, inner height. And basically this if condition is going to be exactly the same. You're probably just noticing that we're not using that loading. So in here, let's go with window, then scroll, and I'm looking for Y. And then I want it to be bigger or equal to a document body. And then we're looking for scroll height. And then let's say minus 2. So if this is the case, then I actually want to create a new state value, the new images value, and I'll set this one equal to true. Effectively, what I'm saying here is, as I'm scrolling, once I get to the bottom of the page, I want to set the state value equal to true. And you can think of it as a light switch, as a Boolean. So let's go here with set new, and we're looking for images, and then we'll set it equal to true. Now, we don't have the function yet and all that. So let's go up. We will create that state value. So this will be equal to new images, then set new images. And then we'll set it equal to our use state. And by default, it's going to be false. So say here false. Then let's scroll down and let's complete our use effect, where I'll invoke this on initial render. And then also once we exit, I want to remove that event listener. So we'll go here with return. And then let's just say window, remove event listener. And then we're going to be looking for scroll event. And then we want to pass in the event. Let's save this. And now let's see what happens once we get there. So we should trigger this set new images equal to true. And in order to show you that, I'm going to go to the big screen. I will refresh, have my components open. You can see my app one. And then notice how once we scroll down, we will change this value equal to true. So that means that we got to the bottom of the page. And what do we want to do now? Well, now we want to trigger this one, the second one. So let me add here new images. So every time this value will change, we will invoke this. But remember, this does not run on initial render. So let's try it out one more time. Now we should see the second one in the console. So let's refresh. There's no second. And only once I scroll down, voila. That's when I get the second one. So what do we want to do here in the second use effect? Well, in here, I want to check two things. I want to check whether loading is true. And if the loading is true, remember, I don't want to trigger another fetch images, correct? So we're not going to add that page if we're loading. That's number one. Number two, remember, this is a Boolean. Basically, I start here with false, and then once we scroll down, we trigger it and we say equal to true. But we need to understand that once we're done fetching images, I actually want to set it back to false. Why? Well, because once I add those new images, eventually you want to scroll down and then trigger it one more time, correct? So here's what we need to do. And the placement here is extremely, extremely important, where inside of the fetch images, you want to go here with set new, and then the photos, I believe the name was, or images, and we'll set it equal to false. But you want to do that before you set the loading equal to false. That's very, very important. So go here, copy and paste, and the same will be here. And I'll remove that console log error. So basically, once we scroll down here, we trigger, we have the second one, and we'll set up the functionality where we update the page. And by doing so, we fetch new images. But once we're done fetching, I want to set this light switch back to false. So I want to be like, okay, we got there, everything's awesome, but now let's set it back to false. And in that use effect, like I said, I want to check two things. First, I don't want to do that if I'm loading. And in order to do that, we just go with if loading, and if it's true, then simply return. Now, what we also want to do is to return if this one is false. Now, when is this false? Well, when we're done fetching, correct? So we only want to run the rest of the functionality if new images is true. Because remember, now we're triggering that in both cases, when we're setting equal to true, and also when we're setting it equal to false. And the thing is, I only want to run the rest of the functionality if it is true. So I'm going to go here with if. So if new images is actually equal to false, then we return. And then finally, let's set up the code where we will increase that page value. So let's go over here. Let's say set page. We'll check the current page. So let's say here old page. And then what we want to return? We want to return old page plus 1. And now you'll notice that once we go back, so we have our initial one, right? So this is where we load all the images and all that. And I can clearly see that with that page one. And then as I start scrolling, check it out. We start loading, but we don't trigger multiple fetch requests because we keep on checking for the loading as well as new images. This is extremely, extremely important. We check for both. And only if we're at the point where we want to fetch new images and we're actually not loading, only then we increase the page. And what happens if we increase the page? Well, then we fetch new images, correct? So let me try out everything just so we can clearly see how everything works. So I fetch new images. I keep scrolling. Notice we're getting new images. Okay, that is awesome. So we have page 1, 2, 3, 4. That seems to be working. Now the second thing that I want to do is search for cat. And notice how we start from the scratch right away, correct? Again, I keep on scrolling. I keep getting the cat images. And now my page is increasing. And then if I want to go back to dog, then I do it this way. Hopefully all of this made sense. And now we can move on to the next project.